Welcome to Twisted Remedies. I'm your host, Justin Kucher, and this is a podcast about the benefits of Jiu Jitsu and other non-traditional remedies in trauma recovery. My guest today is Dan Kraus. Dan is a former Marine infantry officer, retired law enforcement officer with 28 years of service, and Jiu Jitsu brown belt. In this episode, Dan and I talk about how Jiu Jitsu helped him with the stress of being assigned to a child sex exploitation unit at his agency and the overall importance for police officers to train. We also talk about how to prepare new officers to be more resilient at the academy and FTO levels. You're also going to hear us discuss what steps a Jiu-Jitsu academy can take to become trauma-informed so that they're serving that part of their population. Thanks for listening and enjoy this conversation with Dan Kraus. Back here on Twisted Remedies podcast, my guest today is Dan Kraus. Interesting story. So I met Dan at BJJ Globetrotters in Maine this year, like a few weeks ago actually, at the USA camp. And we just ended up partnering up after, I think it was Rich Sab's class was the first one. And we were doing some half guard stuff and talking in that, and we just both realized that we were both retired police officers. Dan's been training way longer than I have. There was a lot of commonality, so I thought that was interesting, and then we talked a little bit more after that. But for people listening, Dan is the owner of Mazamaconsulting. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is, they do security, crisis communication, emergency management. And from what I understand, there's like a trauma-informed kind of component to how you approach that stuff. And I'm sure we'll get into more of that. Dan's a brown belt in Jiu Jitsu and then has a pretty lengthy history between military and law enforcement. You could just talk us through kind of what that history is and how obviously you survived 28 years of being on the job, which is no small feat in and of itself. So
yeah, hopefully I survived all in one piece. I don't know if that's the case or not.
That's the plan.
I'll leave that to the listeners to decide how whole I came through. I'm a brown belt under Casey K. Andrew at Enso Jiu Jitsu. And I've been training for a little more than 12 years. I also do a lot of training with another black belt. This is my main training partner, Nathan Jeffers, who owns Recreate 3.0. He's a black belt under Chris Howder. And at the camp, I kept seeing all these gray-haired guys walking around and going, God dang, they're old. They're doing a great job still doing this sport. And then I was in the mirror, and there was this old guy looking at me. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm one of those guys too.
I like to say it's a certain vintage of that you can spot. So
yeah, but it's great. You have to find training partners that want to train at the speed that you do. And Globetrotters has been a great thing for me. At my first camp in Arizona, I met Chris Paynes and Prick Nicholson, and I started playing a lot of defense, and now my objective in jiu-jitsu is to just be annoying from any position
well,
rather than being good.
It's I think that is being good in its own way. So yeah. So
I've been retired for about 4 years, a little more than 4 years, and I'm loving it. I retired just a few days after George Floyd was killed. It's probably just as good a time as any to depart law enforcement. And luckily, I had a direct path into some work doing that was very meaningful, helping schools prepare for emergencies. And in that process, I was able to have a lot of flexibility, but also have meaningful work and not have a transition where I had this big empty like hole in my soul, if you will.
Right.
And at the same time, I started volunteering with Team Rubicon, and I started doing a lot more jiu-jitsu, and I found lots of things to do. And so I guess at this point, I would probably be best described as a collector of experiences.
I like that.
I'm just running around trying to do as many cool things as possible. I don't want more stuff in my life.
Right.
And so I'm going to be a hoarder of doing cool things. And so for people that are Globetrotters folks, I went to St. Bart's, and which is in the French West Indies, and did Jiu Jitsu overlooking the ocean, and spent a week in one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And I try to do those sorts of things as frequently as possible, and Team Rubicon is part of that. It's not everything has to be perfect like the most beautiful place on earth, but it does have to have meaning and be significant, and sometimes significant in its banality, but significant in that I'm finding things to do,
right,
that can make a difference. And
Team Rubicon, if I understand it right, it's a nonprofit, veteran owned, veteran-led, correct? Veteran-led
disaster response.
Yeah. So just kind of tell me about that. Like, you go into places, and it looks like there's some cases, if I read it right, where you don't wait till the disaster happens. There's some run up, or am I wrong with that?
No, that's correct. There's an aspect of it where we do mitigation work, so we try and get ahead of it, and we've been on tribal lands doing work where we're taking down trees that represent a threat to homes, or maybe represent a threat to sacred tribal land, tribal areas, those sorts of things.
Yep.
And we'll get in there and we run chainsaws, and we carry out materials that are potentially source of wildfires. I'm out west, so wildfires are a major threat. But I've also responded to the South. I've been to Kentucky, and I've been to Louisiana. I've been to Florida for the more common hurricane related or flooding related events that we see happening in the South frequently. And we're really helping people, in many cases veterans, and in some cases first responders too, that find themselves in really desperate situations. And it is an extraordinary experience to be there to help them.
Sounds like
it is hard work and heart work.
Yep.
Which is very powerful, and really it's the kind of thing that dispatch just sends you to do when you're a police officer.
Right.
But when you're not a police officer, you need to seek that out and find those opportunities, because I don't want to get to the place where I'm checking out of this life and think, well, the last 30 years I didn't make a difference.
Right.
I don't want to have anything to do with that.
Yeah, it's that service, the service piece carries over for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Military, Marine Corps officer, infantry officer. You did that.
I was.
That was before police work. And then during your law enforcement career, it looks like I think you rounded out leading the forensics unit, and you were cold case. You did, I think, robbery, homicide. So you had a pretty diverse career in law enforcement as well. So and that
I love patrol work, but I found an enormous amount of both intellectual stimulation and emotionally rewarding being in investigations.
Yeah.
So I spent quite about 17, 18 years doing that.
Oh, wow. And that, I think that, I mean, that's kind of the same, that service piece that, you mentioned with Team Rubicon. It's kind of the same, it checks the same boxes, because you're helping somebody. It's just in a different capacity, but still hard work and heart work for sure. Jiu Jitsu. So what brought you to that? What, you said 12 years you've been training. How'd you get involved with Jiu Jitsu?
Everyone has kind of an origin story of how you get to jiu-jitsu, I suppose. And for me, it was CrossFit. I had been doing CrossFit for a number of years. I owned the CrossFit affiliate that was at the sheriff's office where I worked. Oh. We had regular workouts, group workouts. So there's some similarities in that there's a lot of emotional, social kind of component to what you do in CrossFit. And then my youngest, who at the time was a little kid, I think she was like 8. She wanted to do a martial art, and she started at one gym, and then we ended up at so where we are now, or where I am now, and she's at the Coast Guard Academy as a cadet. So she's
nice.
21 years old and all grown up.
Yeah, they do that.
Yeah, yeah, they do. They get older as I get older.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to bring that part up, but that is definitely part of it.
Yeah. So I followed her into jiu-jitsu, and then she wrestled in middle school, and I did jiu-jitsu through all that. Much of that I was still a police officer on the job.
Yep.
And so at one point I was a patrol sergeant. I applied to be a detective sergeant. They asked me, is there anything you don't want to do in detectives? And I said, well, I definitely do not want to work child pornography. That sounds terrible. Yep. And so I got detective sergeant, but I also became the task force supervisor for our interagency task force that we ran. And so I spent a couple years doing jiu-jitsu to survive mentally, and
like a child crimes task force. The one thing
child sexual exploitation task force.
The one thing you didn't want to do. Yeah.
The one thing I didn't want to do was the one thing I got.
You said task force, and when I made the jump to detective sergeant too, when I made the jump to detective, they were like, you have these as options. That was one of them. And I was like, I definitely don't want to do that. So I went, and I kind of was leaning toward, like some street narcotics work. So I ended up taking the narcotics job and got sent to the DEA task force, which was a very awesome 4.5 years of my career. But surviving surviving work in child cases just wouldn't have been in the cards for me. So kudos to you for surviving. And so, but you mentioned jiu-jitsu was a big part of that. So tell me about that. Yeah,
just as a survival tool, just getting away from it as frequently as possible, because it's just emotionally very damaging work.
Yeah.
And I actually have a friend who is a black belt and is applying for a position doing child sexual exploitation work right now as a investigator at the state attorney general's office. And he asked me, well, what would you do differently? And I said, I would get myself into therapy before I even showed up.
Yeah.
Because no normal person should be able to survive that without help.
Yeah, that's I think it takes a special kind of wiring to be able to do that, and I don't have it. So, but I appreciate the people that do. It's obviously
it's exceptionally important work. There were a total of 0 cases that didn't matter. Right. All of them were either pretty significant or, oh my God, this is so terrible, we've got to save children, kind of things.
Right.
And I did that for a couple years, and then I went to forensics. We integrated all of our forensics people into a single facility. I set that up and moved into that work, which was a lot less emotionally impactful and but extremely rewarding as well.
Right.
And so I retired from there, and that allowed me to continue to train, a couple days a week during the day, but also doing some evening and a lot of weekend stuff.
And so it sounds like jiu-jitsu was your first kind of foray into martial arts, or did you do something prior to?
Yeah, I had done stuff in the Marine Corps. I had taken judo and wrestling in college.
Yep.
It was the first time. This is the first time I've stayed serious about it for a long period of time to achieve the kind of proficiency that comes from doing something for that long.
Sure. So, and now you're doing this, the Mazama Consulting. Again, we talked at the opening, but it's consulting around crisis communications, emergency management, and with I know you mentioned like a lot of the impact with the schools, and I think we talked about we had a brief conversation about like law enforcement not being very trauma informed when it comes to trainings and stuff like that. But can you just kind of tell me what the consulting looks like and how that trauma piece plays into that if it does.
Yeah. I just do a variety of things that I like doing because I'm collecting
cool
experiences,
things, yeah.
right? Yeah. It's not stuff, it's experiences.
Right.
And so I amongst the things that I did during my time working for schools was I connected with a really remarkable lady who has through our interaction with schools developed a program for teaching children how to do our emergency drills. So things like lockdown, secure, evacuation, the things that we kind of do routinely, you think, in schools, that you think about when schools are, like if they're doing a fire drill.
Right.
Fire drill is essentially evacuation drill. And but they are not always put into context for kids.
Right.
And so I was able to put that into we are able through this training program. It's really designed around a story.
Is this about the moose?
Sasquatch?
Oh, right, Sasquatch.
No,
that's what
it's
it was.
A Sasquatch. Yeah.
I had heard it on the podcast that you were on that you sent me, and I was trying to remember what I knew it was some sort of creature. It's a Sasquatch, right?
Yeah, it's a Sasquatch, exactly. And so by putting things into a context that the kids can really understand. You know, I don't know if you've noticed, but you don't really see a lot of Sasquatches. They're good at staying out of sight.
Yeah.
And when we teach kids how to do lockdown, which is an absolutely terrifying process potentially if you don't put it into context.
Right.
We tell them locks, lights, out of sight. Well, if they're thinking about what would Sammy do, Sammy stays quiet, Sammy stays out of sight, Sammy stays calm. Well, that's very different than saying a horrible human being is going to come in here and murder you potentially if you don't stay quiet.
Right.
And I think that the consequence of not doing it is potentially adding to dysregulation. Yeah. That process of becoming kind of unhinged, disconnected from normal regulated behavior. And then when I think the connection to police work is we have seen our coworkers at times become dysregulated.
Right.
Like if you look at excessive use of force or people that get addicted to pain medications is another one that's not nearly as uncommon as you would hope.
Right.
People that engage in sexual improprieties connected with the job.
Yep.
Those things are really dysregulation because we haven't necessarily given them the tools that they need to deal with the trauma that they're seeing on the job. And sometimes it's just bad behavior.
Right.
But
right.
I think that the trauma of the job makes that worse. And actually Oregon's, because I'm in Oregon, Oregon's Department of Public Safety Standards and Training, which is the police academy and the disciplinary body or the licensing body, if you will, for the state, they are actually introducing trauma-informed practices to the police academy so that we're putting people out there with a little bit more in the way of tools for doing the job.
Did your agency coming up through, and you were like, I had just shy of 24, so I didn't quite have the 28, but I think, I was good at 24. Good for you for doing 28. I was ready to go. Did you, my agency, when I first started, you just went to bad calls and then you swallowed it and you went to the next bad, and there was very little, check-ins. We may have done a debrief on like a felony stuff, something that tactically we did a debrief, but there wasn't a lot of like mental health check-ins or trauma check-ins. And then toward the end of my career, that was starting to become a thing. Is that kind of the similar timeline that you saw out on the West Coast?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. The critical incident debrief, I think, is relatively prevalent out west at least. But I also think that there has to be, it's really just the big events, like officer-involved shootings. You can assume that there's going to be a pretty extensive critical incident debrief. But I had an incident where my neighbor was involved in a car crash, not terribly far from where I live, and she passed, but the incident was extremely traumatic. They were still alive in the car. She and her boyfriend were in a car that hit a telephone pole or a tree. Either way, it was like nearly split the car in half. Yeah. And they had to cut at the car for hours. And at the conclusion of that, the firefighters brought in new crews so that they could do a debrief right then. They brought in all kinds of resources. They did a barbecue, and the patrol sergeant said, "Hey, there's calls holding,
right,
and you better hit the street."
Yep.
And so that difference is it's quite remarkable in my mind.
Yeah.
Because I've been the guy saying there's calls holding.
Me too.
And so maybe that incident wasn't as traumatic as, say, an officer-involved shooting, but we don't get to choose what affects us.
Right.
We're kind of programmed for that before you even show up on the job. And so we just need to get to a place where supervisors and managers are cognizant, much more cognizant about the kind of cases that people are working. And maybe you do have to do a call out, because losing an employee is far more expensive than bringing in someone on overtime, so you can send that person to the gym to go work off some of the poisons out of their system, or give them a day off, the next day off, all that kind of stuff that makes leadership in police work crazy, right? Because it's all about filling spots.
Yeah.
And we just need to be way better at that.
Yeah. I used to describe supervising patrol like you're driving a bus down the road, and there's Jersey barriers on either side, and the sergeant's job is to make sure that the bus doesn't hit either side of the barrier. Just keep it in the middle, don't smash into anything. But the distinction on why the fire service is so much better at that. We all go to the same stuff, so it is perplexing why they are better at post trauma calls to take care of their people, and I don't know why that is, but they're just.
Well, I can tell you one of the reasons is that in the United States, police work is largely an individual sport.
That's a good point.
You're either in the car by yourself, or God forbid you're in the car with a trainee that's maybe even worse than being by yourself.
Right.
And you kind of come together for a hot call, you come apart. It's constantly like that, where firefighting is a team sport.
That's true. Yeah.
And they always have that support of, there's 3 of us that showed up, there's 4 of us that showed up, whether you're on an engine or a truck. Maybe you're on a squad with only 2, but you're really not showing up to stuff by yourself. And I think that makes an enormous difference.
I wonder if part of it too is after, police get done a call and they just drive off, and everybody goes their separate ways, but firefighters typically go back to the firehouse where they all are, and they can that's got to be a part of it as well, I would think.
Yeah. It's just an extension of that notion of it being much more of a team, much less solo.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that Jiu Jitsu brings, right? It gives you this feeling of connection. It's very difficult to feel disconnected from your training partner when you're essentially doing, violent cuddling.
Yeah.
And you do feel connected to the person, even if you're very different. If the person doesn't have a job anything like yours, sometimes you'll have way deeper conversations. I know that I have.
Yep.
than you would with someone with whom you otherwise have much more in common.
Yeah.
But it breaks down barriers.
It does. And I feel like you're also so in the moment that all of that other stuff is, you don't have time to focus on it, because you're the mind body connection and then being so in the moment with this other person has to be your entire focus.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that mindfulness is an important thing to bring to law enforcement to improve people's resilience and to improve their mental health. But the great thing about jiu-jitsu is it is kind of a strange, dynamic, kinetic, whatever you want to call it, form of mindfulness, because you really can't be thinking about other things, or that arm's going to get straightened out, your shoulder's going to get locked, you're going to get choked.
That's interesting. I've never thought of it that way, because the department I retired from had we had like a clinician assigned to the department that they partnered with, and there was talk of mindfulness, but getting a bunch of cops to sit in a room and breathe and focus and is, as I'm sure you experienced, very difficult to get everybody on the same page and to take that seriously. But that's a good point. Jiu-jitsu is very, it makes you do that stuff without realizing you're doing it. I like that. Excellent.
Pajama wrestling.
It is.
There's all those names.
The struggle, snuggle. Yeah. So many good things.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think that's part of why it's such a powerful tool in trauma recovery. Any other components to that you think really play into? I mean, for me, there was a lot of cumulative stuff, and some of it I didn't really think I didn't recognize it as being trauma until the last big piece of trauma fell on me, and then it was like, oh, there's, as I started unpacking that with my therapist and EMDR and all kinds of cool stuff, I realized like there's more in here that I hadn't even realized was, in the trauma vault. And when I started doing jiu-jitsu, it was just so, I was in a dark spot, and it was so freeing, and I got to walk off the mat euphoric, and I was like, it was so powerful. And so I haven't looked back, and I don't want to look back, but it's just such a powerful thing. And that's kind of what has prompted me to do this, because I'm trying to figure that out for other people so that they don't wait as long as I did. But it's such a powerful thing, and it's part of it is that mind body piece, but I'm sure there's more to it. So that's, any insight you have on that, I find fascinating.
Well, I think that one of the things that both police officers and non-police officers don't really think about enough is how much trauma you experience. So most police officers experience in 1 or 2 weeks the amount of trauma that a normal human would experience in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And so the amount that you're getting, the reason that you had these events that were traumatic but you never unpacked them, was because a few days later you had something that was 10 times worse.
Right.
And so it's not you almost can't keep up. And I also do work, or some of the work which you were listening to in that podcast that I did before about psychological safety. And I think that trauma-informed work is connected to that feeling of psychological safety.
Right.
And how do we deliver psychological safety? And there are many people talk about police work being dangerous, which I actually don't think it's that dangerous in terms of physical hazards. Working construction is way worse. I mean, getting, these guys that, they fall off a ladder and land on a piece of rebar.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff doesn't happen in police work that much. Sometimes there's assaults against police officers, but the psychosocial hazards in police work, many of which we heap on ourselves.
Yep.
By not having the right type of inclusion, with new employees, not bringing them in, not making them feel like they're welcome and safe. I don't know if you guys use the field training and evaluation program that we use out here.
We actually
the San Jose model.
Yep, that's what we were using.
Yeah, in my mind, it is almost designed to take away psychological safety. It's that constant evaluation. Am I a 4? Oh God, I hope I'm a 4.
Gotta go over the brick wall.
Shit. Oh yeah, exactly. Oh shit, I'm a 3 today.
Right.
Oh God, goody, I got a 5 on something today.
Right.
It's just such a strange process. I had, when I was a patrol sergeant, I was supervising field training officers who had recruits, and some of them would just sit there because there was this obsession with documentation, and they would just type the whole time. They were like that little cat in the meme, right?
Yeah.
The whole time
Yeah.
they're just typing, while the recruit is trying to actually get out there and do police work, and it's like, that is a terrible idea. Like, who in their right mind thought that this was going to produce great results?
Yeah.
And so what we're doing, and I understand you have to document things that result in getting rid of somebody, because we don't want to have negligent retention either. But on some level, you have to give the person a sensation that like if there's another police officer at the scene, that they can be relied on to provide useful assistance,
Right.
and useful feedback. Anyway, we do a bunch of stuff where the psychosocial hazards are self-imposed by the organization upon the members.
Yeah, and you think that compounds all that inevitable trauma that they encounter on the job. Like, it sets that. I think it sounds like you're saying like potentially the way some academies are run, and then that FTO piece puts them on a path to absorbing everything else that comes their way.
Yeah, I was a lateral to the agency that I was with, and I remember the first day, one of the captains just yelled at us just because I think it was sport. I don't even remember what the subject of what he was yelling at us about, but we were in his office and he's kind of ranting. And I was like, no, why couldn't he talk about how happy he was to have us there to do the work of making the community safer?
Right.
That to me, like, massive missed opportunities. And we used to encourage that kind of curmudgeon-y, sort of boot campy behavior. But to me, that's not helpful at all. And I don't see, obviously I'm not on the job anymore, so I'm not like right in the middle of training, but I just don't see a lot of enthusiasm to change things so that we can create a different kind of environment within the organization. Maybe it's just not something that they even see.
Yeah,
because they're right in the middle of it.
I think change doesn't come easy to, in any aspect of law enforcement. It's a scarlet letter, and people run from it until they can't run from it. That's my experience anyway.
Yeah, but I do see, like, my daughter's at the Coast Guard Academy. She's a second class, so she's cadre for the summer, and the new superintendent of the academy has decided that they're not going to scream and yell at them the first week. They got 7 weeks to do that. They'll do it later. So they're giving them a week to become more acclimated, to figure out all the stuff before they feel that full level of intensity. And I find it remarkable that someone's like, hey, maybe we should do something different so that people feel safe and we have better results.
Right. Yeah. Well, you wonder
why we set the bar low.
You wonder what prompted that too. It's like there's, change, stuff like that doesn't happen. At least what I've seen, it doesn't happen without something, some impetus going, oh, we got to change this. So I'd be curious if there was some underlying thing that, caused them to reevaluate that. Yeah.
Well, I'm actually looking forward to hear from my daughter to see how different things are, because of course she went through it 2 years ago. So she will have a significant amount of insight, having experienced it and now seeing it and putting it into effect.
Interesting. So we talked about the trauma-informed work, like the consulting you do and all of that. And as I started realizing that jiu-jitsu was such an important piece of trauma recovery. I started looking around, and one of the things I started looking into was like what trauma-informed jiu-jitsu would look like. So I'm curious what you think that means. What is trauma-informed jiu-jitsu, and how do you roll that out to an academy if somebody was looking to do something like that?
Well, I think that one of the things we need to do is we need to take some of the ego and some of the overly masculine energy out of jiu-jitsu. That some of that came from Brazil, because Brazil has a very macho culture. And for example, one of the things I hear in jiu-jitsu frequently is don't tap to pressure.
Right.
But if you're the new person and you're like, I've never experienced anything like this, how do we should give them permission to tap out of that place that's just totally uncomfortable until there's an adaptation. Because there's a significant physical adaptation that happens.
Yeah.
There's the physiological changes, and there's also you just learn how to adjust way better so that you're not feeling a lot of pressure.
Right.
But there's still times where I'm like, wow, this totally sucks. And I had this great idea. I was going to go to deep half, and now I've got some 265-pound guy sitting on my neck.
Wait, it doesn't get better at brown belt? What the heck am I doing?
It just becomes, you have more tools to deal with the discomfort, and sometimes you get to be on top.
Oh,
but yeah. So I just think that we should give people permission to tap to pressure, or to just sit by the side of the mat and watch. That's something that, of course, at BJJ Globetrotters is a survival mechanism.
Right.
But maybe you don't feel comfortable with it, with what they're doing. Maybe you just want to watch it. In police work, typically there's, you have some observation days at the beginning of field training, right? Just to get an idea of how this thing works.
Yep.
I just don't think that there's a systematic way that we get people into jiu-jitsu.
Right.
And a lot of times it's, hey, throw on a gi, or just come out here in your sweats or whatever it is, and let's do whatever the thing of the day is.
Yeah.
God forbid it should be berimbolo.
Right. Right. Yeah. What am I doing?
Because I was asked, like, is there an old man version of this? Because I'm not going to invert in any roles. I mean, come on.
Right.
I'm just glad I showed up, much less doing it upside down.
Yeah.
And so I think that probably it would include something like small group or private lessons.
Yep.
for new people. I think that we're really good at this at my gym, which is when people show up and there's that awkward standing around where people are getting dressed or whatever nonsense is going on, that I don't think that my instructors ever said it, but we just have a culture where people introduce themselves, they shake their hand,
Yep.
They ask them where they're coming from. That, to me, if you don't have a sense of inclusion,
right,
it will be very difficult to feel like you are, that you're safe.
You're welcome and part of the. I think safe's a good way to put that, for sure.
And I've been lucky. I've been able to, like, if cops come in, I'm always like, here's my number. If you want to see how we can put this into effect on the street to keep yourself safer, unlimited free private lessons, I'm glad to do it.
Yep.
And maybe it needs to be for everybody. Hey, do you want to do 2 or 3 privates just, on me? I mean, I'm always looking for a training partner anyway, so I'm not trying to make any money off of this. Right. So if someone said, hey, do you want to come train? I'd be like, yeah, what time? But I think more of that would make people feel included.
Yeah.
And would allow them to answer questions, and you're a blue belt, right?
Yeah.
So to them, you're a god.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
to the new person. It's awesome. Right. And so they can ask you questions like, what is, what is this wrist locking stuff that Dan is always joking about? What does that mean?
Oh, I love wrist locks. It's an equalizer. It's such an equalizer. I roll with guys
awesome.
most of the time I roll with guys half my age, so it's like, I'm going to wrist lock you. That's just, you expect that it's coming at some point.
Exactly. And truly the best thing is when you wrist lock somebody with their choking hand, that they're trying to choke you, and then it's like spy versus spy.
Or when they defend something else you're doing and they put their hand right where you, like, I love it when I'm going for the Americana and they're like, no, and they put their hand up and I just flatten my chest onto it and they're like, that, I probably should have seen that coming, but
it's the best. Yeah. So I think that if I were a gym owner, which I will never be, but I'm part of a gym community.
Yep.
It would be about how do I make people feel safe, particularly new people. I wore my Craig Jones Keep Jiu Jitsu Gay tank top, which doesn't look good on me because I don't really have the figure for it, let's just say. Maybe that makes it funnier, though. And so I was wearing that in the gym, and someone said to me, thanks for wearing that. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. For them, it meant something different than what it meant for me, which was Craig Jones is one of the funniest human beings on earth.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for them, it meant they felt included.
They were safe. Yeah.
Like they were safe. Yeah. And so the more of that we do, the better.
I saw something when I was researching this. There's a woman who opened an academy in, I think it was Australia, and it was trauma informed, and she had like some of the things they do differently that are trauma informed, and something as simple as when you leave the mat, you give a thumbs up, so you let kind of the people who are paying attention know that you're okay. I was like, something that simple is pretty profound, because if you don't leave the mat and put your thumb up, somebody is going to go, casually check on you and make sure you're good. And for somebody, I think about like a woman with trauma going to train, and maybe she has a bad roll that triggers some things. That is such a huge piece to know that, okay, if I leave the mat and I'm not doing great, there's going to be, somebody's hopefully paying attention and gonna come talk about that. I just thought something as simple as put your, give a thumbs up when you leave is so simple, but so, I think, profound at the same time. So.
Yeah. I also think that we can teach men how to roll with women.
Yep.
And I essentially just break out the book of Pritt, right? I go into playing some defensive BJJ, and let them be on top for a while, right?
Yep.
Let them knee ride me, let them tear my limbs off, and sometimes I get tapped.
Right.
And that's okay. I was actually rolling on Sunday with a gal she's a purple belt. Her jiu-jitsu is magnificent, but she weighs 115 pounds. Like, we're not in the same weight class.
Right.
But she got this, she was like on top of me and did this crazy shoulder lock on me. And I was like, oh my God, that was amazing. Can we recreate it? And she said, no, I have no idea how that came about, but it was really cool.
It's purple belt
But she
magic.
also has a PhD in civil engineering, so
all right, yeah.
She probably way too smart to be able to explain it to a dummy like me.
Well, it probably just was some instinctual engineering thing that she figured out, and she went home and wrote it down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think that if you learn how to roll, like, here I am rolling with a woman that weighs 100 pounds less than I do, and I'm learning from it because I'm open to the idea that, maybe she's going to get like some crazy full mount with, on top of me where she's ripping my shoulders off. And then I saw it and like, okay, maybe I can get that at some point. Maybe I can look for that type of shoulder lock when I'm in a dominant position like that.
But I think that goes back to the ego piece you talked about earlier. Like if you're approaching rolls without ego, and I saw this on Instagram the other day. I forget who put it up, but it basically said something like rolling, like at class, rolling is meditation, not competition. And I was like, that's that's kind of brilliant, because if you take the ego out of it, and have fun with it, moments like that can happen. And you learn something, whether you're on the top, on the bottom, winning or losing. And I think that's another piece of what makes this such an amazing thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can make a lot more progress if we take the ego out.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So you've been training for 12 years, and
yes,
you are, like we said at the beginning, you're a certain vintage. How do you balance the wear and tear and the demands of staying active? It sounds like you train pretty regularly.
Yeah, I try to train 6 days a week and do some. Wow. I would go more if I were feeling it, but I find that that's about that taking a day off from jiu-jitsu, not from working out.
Right.
I do some sort of active recovery on my days off, but I think we're constantly looking at our age. I'm 59, so I'm constantly looking for ways to overcome small issues.
Yep.
Because I realize that I am one major injury away from selling my gis and doing nothing but pickleball.
Right.
Because, people blow out a knee. Especially if people are remotely close to a heel hook, I'm like, I put my hand on them. I say, go really slow, and I'll tap as soon as I feel the least amount of pressure. I promise I will tap. Yep. You don't have, you've already won.
Yeah. Don't take it home with you. I'd like to keep it.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I think I probably learned. So, my Instagram handle is, Danny 9.33 toes, because, I was rolling way too hard with an enormous guy. He was probably 400 pounds. He was a white belt as well, and he tipped over and landed on my foot, and one of my toes got caught in his gi. Ooh. And eventually had to be amputated.
Oh, wow.
So I'm missing 2/3 of one of my toes.
I wondered if that was. I saw your handle, and I'm like, I wonder if there's a toe story. I'm glad we got to that.
Yeah, there's a lot to that toe story. I think I was at an open mat one time, and a guy was trying to foot lock me, and he looked down at my foot, and he stopped. He goes, "Oh, you're the toe guy."
Great.
Indeed I am.
Yeah.
Thank you for noticing.
That's me.
Yeah, that's me. It's no big deal. I mean, I'm not sure I'm using the other 9 toes to their fullest extent anyway, so being one short is not changing my life in any way.
Yeah.
But when you do have that kind of injury, you're like, oh, I need to be pretty careful. I've had, I think it's called preacher's knee, basically from the pressure of being on your knees so much. And I'm like, well, I think my knees would probably be happier if they were warmed up. So I just kind of wear a couple of knee sleeves that are protective. They have a little, I'm always looking for something. Yep. I do a protocol to keep my back strong and limber. I do a fair amount of yoga. I try to not watch television just sitting on my tush. Yep. I actually just bought something called I think it's called a Gibboard. It's from Gibbon, the slackline company. Oh. And so it's like a little slackline that's built into a thing that looks like a snowboard.
Really?
And so I just try and stand on this wobbly surface while I'm watching.
I was just looking at the Indo board. I was thinking of getting one of those, which is like the board that looks like a little surfboard on top of a roller. And it's the same.
Oh yeah. Same idea.
Same idea.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there's times where you're otherwise inactive.
Yep.
Not necessarily watching television, but where you're just sitting around. You could just as easily be standing on whatever unbalanced surface. Yeah. Maybe we don't even have to buy something. I mean, there might be a 4x4 and a couple of 4x4s right. in the garage you could use, right. maybe to balance on.
Yeah.
But everything. I had a boss in the Marine Corps that said training is everything and everything is training. If I take those opportunities to improve myself, to seek out ways to stay healthier, stronger. I actually drove to the main camp from Oregon. So I drove Portland to
Oh,
Portland.
wow.
Took me 4 days, long days.
Well, that explains
But
why, because you were in New York City after, weren't you?
I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I met my daughter at the academy, and then we went for a weekend in New York and saw the Liberty play against the Fever.
Oh, wow.
Which was pretty extraordinary, and and got an amazing bagel in New York City, walked the Brooklyn Bridge, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
More collecting of experiences,
of experience. I like that. I'm gonna steal that because that's good stuff.
It's just a term for what you're probably doing anyway.
Yeah, but now I have a name for it.
Yeah.
This is kind of me collecting experiences in a way because it's it's cool. I'm only a handful of these in, but it's kind of fun. So
it sounds really cool. I'm impressed.
Well, thanks.
It's neat.
Thanks.
Anyway, so I drove cross country, and every 2 hours I would stop, make a quick bathroom break, get some squats in, do some planking, just to make sure that I was when I showed up to the camp that I wasn't going to be a complete wreck.
You could get out of the car.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and so I got a lot of weird looks, but I'm accustomed to that. I get a lot. If you're at a rest stop and you're over there doing squats and planking, people are like, why is that guy doing that weird stuff?
Yeah.
And of course, then they hobble their way into the bathroom and come out and get a donut or whatever.
Yeah.
So I felt superior to them.
Well, you clearly are. You were on your way to a week-long jiu-jitsu camp, and
which was amazing.
It was. Yeah, it really was. Good stuff.
Yeah.
So you had showed me it's a CBD, like a gel, like a muscle gel that you use.
Oh yeah.
And I looked into that. I think given the aftermath of chemo, my liver is not going to tolerate a whole lot of CBD. But I'm curious, like what, I'm sure other people listening are curious about that. So tell me about CBD and how that helps.
So I signed up with a company called Lazarus Naturals. They have apparently a very good reputation because my gym has a bunch of people that are in the industry, and they're like, hey, do you want to buy some stuff? And I was like, well, I get a really good deal from Lazarus Naturals. I had to redact my DD214 and send it to them, and they give me 60% off, which is like,
wow,
absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
They're doing good things for veterans, and so I love their product, but to me, it's part of that whole thing. Like, I'm constantly looking for ways to improve my ability to stay in this game as long as possible. And it's an antioxidant.
Yep.
I like their topical products. I don't know. I'm not like a super scientist about how it works, but I think that there's less, at least out west, where marijuana has been legalized for a while, that cannabis products like CBD seem like no big deal at all. But I know like the military is still freaking out about that stuff. Like they don't want, they're like, well, we can't guarantee that you're not going to come up positive on a piss test.
Right.
So they tell people to stay away from that. I don't own stock in Lazarus, so I don't know. I don't know the details of the product, but I've had really good results with they have some products that both heat and have topical CBD, and I throw that on underneath my knee sleeves when I put them on before I roll.
Oh, before. Oh, that's good thinking.
Just trying. Well, but joints, you're trying to get synovial fluid to flow within the joint, and so anything you can do to make that a warmer, more caring environment for the bones is a good thing.
Right. Any other twisted remedies that you rely on a regular basis to kind of keep yourself well and heal and any of that stuff?
Well, one of the things, and I don't know how this is for you, but one of the things that I had was I had interrupted sleep for years. My sleep as a police officer was truly terrible. I was on call for many years. Yep. Even when I was in patrol, before I became a detective, I was on call because I was on the dive team.
Oh.
And this old curmudgeon that I was working for said, "You're not going to be able to have 2 pagers." And I was like, "I can handle it." And he was right.
Yeah.
About 2 weeks later, I was like, "Here's my dive pager. I'm off the team. Bye."
Yeah.
And so, but that whole like being available, there's a ton in detectives, particularly if we're working persons crimes. There's a ton of pressure to get out there to help with cases. Yeah. And so, I just the number of times that I was interrupted in the night cannot possibly be good for you.
No. Well,
there's just no way.
And shift work in and of itself is terrible for you, and so that all compounds later.
Yeah, and so I've really worked hard to create like decent sleep hygiene. I'm not great at getting off my cell phone, but if I can get off the phone before I'm trying to go to sleep, making sure that I'm creating the right environment for it. And then when I do get lower quality of sleep, I try and get the right number of hours. I'm trying to hit 7 or 8 hours, even if I have to take a nap.
Yep.
And now there's some study that says that people that take naps live longer. So I'm like, I'm winning.
Yep. There was another study I saw, or somebody was talking that the grapplers who get choked a lot are less likely to have strokes. So we got that going for us too, apparently.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Which seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, one of my training partners has been landing that north-south choke on me recently, so I'm going to have to thank him.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm going to call him Doctor from here on out.
There you go. Any veterans or police officers listening, what would you say to motivate them to start training if they're not training already? As somebody with 28 years past law enforcement, some years as a Marine Corps infantry officer, a brown belt, all of this stuff, like, for me, you are like, you check a lot of boxes for somebody. I think people on the job and in the military or recently separated from the military, as somebody they should listen to, because you've been there, you've done that, and you found a way out. At least that's the way it appears now for all of us. So yeah. What do you say to them to if they're hesitant to get on the mats, or they're hesitant to try to fix that stuff?
Well, I think you have to do something to keep yourself sane. I mean, if someone were a world-class CrossFitter and they're like, I don't want to do jiu-jitsu because I don't need people sweating in my eye, I'd be like, okay, you're probably going to be fine.
Yeah.
But you got to do something that helps keep you sane, that is your focus, that have a hobby. Don't be the guy that just comes home and like sits in front of the television.
Right.
To me, if you rushed home from your shift and you had to get out the door to hit jiu-jitsu and you were gone for 90 minutes, you're going to be doing your family way more good when you do get back. Yep. And you're healthy and you're sane than if you are in that crazy up and down stress reaction cycle that police officers get into. And so I think you just have to find a place where you're going to be healthy. I do think that the military, because especially the Marine Corps, has done a pretty good job of having a lot of people that are doing jiu-jitsu. Yep. It's become part of the culture because they have the Marine Corps martial arts program, which does incorporate a fair amount of jits. And so I follow the jiu-jitsu team at the Naval Academy. Oh, yeah. Which is at Annapolis. And they're producing some really, really good grapplers there, and they have a parade of high-level guys that are senior staff non-commissioned officers and officers that are going back there and teaching. Oh, wow. and using it, because I do think that there is a real, not just a personal benefit, but there's a leadership benefit that comes from being good at a martial art. Yep. Where you're just feeling more confident when you're leading troops. That would be true in police work as well. Although you're probably the senior person that I've ever met who's involved in jiu-jitsu. You were a lieutenant, right?
I was when I left, yeah. But I was,
Yeah.
where was I when I left? I was a white belt when I left the PD. So I still train with the same LEO. They let me stick around after I retired. I don't know if they felt bad for me or what, but they let me continue the LEO class, and then like 4 months after I retired, I got sick and had to deal with cancer for 6 months and all of that. But I was a white belt when I was a lieutenant, so my schedule was pretty accommodating for me to get to class during the day. So,
and it's like Portland Police, which is the next agency over, if you will. They actually in their contract got an hour a day of wellness, and they're running their frequent open mats.
That's great.
At their precincts, and that to me is where it needs to go.
Yep.
Like I train between 6 and 8 hours a week of jits. That I think our police academy requires, or the licensing agency, they require like 8 hours per year, or maybe 8 hours every 3 years. I can't remember.
Yep.
It's minuscule.
Yeah.
And you and I did more training than that in a week at the Globetrotters camp.
Right.
And so, if you're gonna get into it with somebody, you do not want to be relying on the very brief amount of training that you get.
Vermont
at the police
is 4 hours. I
academy.
think Vermont is still 4 hours per year, and it's some of that I think still involves reading the policy. So it's and my old agency actually they were very forward thinking in when we set the program up. A guy that worked for me when I was a admin lieutenant, he was a recruiter. He was a brown belt at the time, and so he was pushing this whole like program through the PD to the point where they were paying cops overtime, a certain amount of overtime to show up and train, but we still couldn't get people on the mats, like as many people that you would expect would show up to get paid to train. But so that's part of this too, is me trying to get people to do that, because I think it's beneficial, on the job when you're in the middle of something. It's beneficial for all the trauma and stress. It's beneficial across the board, in my opinion. So,
yeah. I also think that a lot of us, like we don't have any friends outside of police work when we're cops.
Yep.
I see that fairly frequently. Like, at least you'll know a couple of stoners, a couple of doctors,
right.
A hairdresser. Meet some other people.
Right.
And see them to me, there's a real benefit of seeing them in a light of like, he's my training partner.
Yeah. Not when you're dealing with like a moment in their life that is, possibly fleeting.
Exactly.
Well, Dan, this has been awesome. As I expected. As we wrap up, anything you want to plug, anything you want to add? I'm going to put links to, I'll put links to the other podcast you were on, the Psych Health and Safety one. I think that's good for people to listen to as well. Anything you want to throw out there? If people are looking to connect with you or Mazama.
Yeah, feel free to put my email in there.
Okay.
People can reach out to me. I'm here to help. I'm looking for experiences. If people want to talk about trauma that they've had, or maybe they're working child sexual exploitation cases and they want someone to talk to, I'm glad to talk to people because I have a great retirement, so I'm very grateful for it. And so if I can give back,
yep, whilst
drawing that retirement, I think that is going to make it all the more rewarding. And so yep, I'm glad, and I'm also very grateful to you to take the challenges that we have in this job and get the word out and get people thinking.
It felt like I said, I didn't start thinking, I should do a podcast, but I remember I was listening to another podcast and it was jiu-jitsu related, and then I was talking to somebody else about trauma, and I'm like, man, I could talk about jiu-jitsu and trauma all day. And then I went, maybe I should do a podcast. And it's been such a profound thing for me that I I felt like, if not me, then who is going to maybe try to, if one person listens to this and gets something out of it and can get themselves out of a dark place, then I've succeeded in anything I was trying to do. So.
Yeah, and I think all of us who have been on the job for as long as you and I were have had people. We've lost people to both medical situations and lost to death by suicide.
Yep.
And this, to me, is the kind of thing that you need in your life, so that you can gain meaning and be able to overcome those things.
Absolutely.
It really is. It's a tragedy to see people take their own life when they could have social connections that would make that seem as nonsensical as it does to those that are left behind.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, thank you, and it's been a pleasure. And I'm glad you reached over at camp and said, "Hey, you want to be my partner?" I was like, "Absolutely," and everything works out for a reason. So
it does.
Again, I appreciate your time.
Okay, and we'll stay in contact because we got to plan. I want my next camp to be in Europe.
I actually have passport paperwork I need to finish filling out because I haven't traveled overseas since the military 100 years ago. So I need to get on that, because some of those, like that Iceland camp looks cool. Estonia looks cool.
Yeah.
There's a castle one somewhere.
I'm struggling trying to decide between the Zen camp, Parnu, which is the beach camp, and Tallinn, which is the other Estonian camp.
Yeah.
They all look amazing, and I've never been to the Baltics, so let's make that happen.
I'm down. I gotta get off my butt and get my passport.
Yeah, do it. I got a kid that lives in Norway, so I can come up with an excuse.
There you go. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you, my brother.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of Twisted Remedies. If you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, and write a review on whichever podcast platform you're listening on. Also, if you'd like to ask a question about something you've heard on an episode or didn't hear on an episode, or you'd like to recommend a topic or a guest, please go to twistedremedies.com and connect with me there. Most importantly, as always, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.